Mysterious anomalies, a country ravaged by civil war, and you, a loner stuck in the middle trying to unravel the secrets of a devastating calamity. My name is Kodiak, this is Legacy Gaming, and today we're checking out Hell Is Us. Guys, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't intrigued by Hell Is Us. Third person, melee focused with very little hand-holding. All things I like in my games. Recently, I was invited to travel to Montreal, the home of Rogue Factor Studio. There, I got the opportunity to go hands-on with Hell Is Us for about 3 hours, checking out the first beats of the game, as well as the first dungeon. And while I wasn't there nearly long enough to give you a complete picture of the game, it was certainly enough time to form some early impressions. Hell Is Us takes place in the early 90s in a fictional country divided by civil war. At the same time, a strange calamity has caused these alien-like creatures to rise up, further adding to the overall mayhem. You play as Remy, a loner who grew up in the foster care system and now is caught up in the war. The whole premise of the game is that Remy is trying to get back into the country to find his parents. Beyond that, I have no clue, because like I said, we really only got to play the first few hours of the game, and it was largely predicated on the gameplay. Hell Is Us is billed as having a unique exploration system, and that, more than anything else, is the reason why I made the trek up to Canada to check out this game early. As you know, if you've joined our Sunday night streams, if there's one thing I love about games, it's innovation, and exploration is where I think Hell Is Us is really pushing that envelope. The game doesn't feature a traditional quest system, and there are no maps. Instead, you rely on your ability to perceive the world with observations of main objectives and secrets, compiling it into a menu called Investigations. There's nothing in the game that outright leads you from one point to another, but I love that about Hell Is Us. Another game from this year, Atomfall, attempted something similar, giving players less guidance as they work to solve various mysteries in the game, but outside of that, the gameplay couldn't be more different. This system works seamlessly with the game's semi-open world, so you are limited in a sense, but even in the earliest parts of the game, there is optionality and plenty of secrets you can discover or completely miss. For example, I decided to explore past an area of trenches and found myself by a strange tower, even though the main objective was the opposite direction. Nothing prompted me to explore in that direction, my curiosity just led me there. It's very reminiscent of games like Remnant 2, which, as you know, is one of our favorites, where the environment almost entices you to explore and question the world around you. There are some more straightforward or traditional secrets, but even those require you to observe the world around you. During my playtest, I picked up 2 different medallions during some exploration. It was all part of the main path, but the resolution of the secret actually required me to backtrack, so if you're not paying attention, you end up missing out on the reward. There are no flashing beacons, arrows, or waypoints, you just have to observe and then react. It's things like that, especially early on, that are good precursors for what's to come once the game opens up, and it absolutely opens up, even if I didn't have the chance to fully experience that. Within the first 30 minutes of the game, you'll meet the game's first NPC, and this introduces you to the narrative system. It's similar to that of a Fallout game, where you can talk to an individual and prompt a number of topics, and as the discussion expands, more prompts become available. You can also ask about some general topics that provide backstory on the world, the war, and a number of other subjects. There's a unique look to this system, which I really like, and each of the characters is fully voice acted, which helps immerse you in the world. I was genuinely worried this might end up being the type of game that only voices maybe an intro line, but everything is narrated as far as we can tell, which is a huge plus in our eyes. I can't speak to the quality of every NPC interaction since I was limited to just a small handful, but from what I heard, it was sounding really good. As you talk to various NPCs, key bits of information will populate your investigations, providing you with more information about the numerous things you might be tracking. On top of that, as you explore, you'll also find any number of interesting items, and these all feed into that same investigation system. I found a number of items that in the moment I had no clue what they did, but it's clear there's a reason for their existence. This is what I find so intriguing about a game that takes away almost all of the guardrails. All the things you'd expect in a game are there, the obscure and ornate objects, the NPCs with their own motivations, but because you're not guided in the traditional sense, everything feels like a big environmental puzzle that you're trying to solve. For example, within the first minutes of the game, I picked up a gold medallion. I never figured out what it was for or who would find it interesting, but that mystery is there for me to solve at some point. Similarly, I ended up finding a gold watch about 2 hours into my playtest. It just so happens the watch band has the last name of the first character that I met. I'm almost positive if I went back and delivered it to him, something would have happened. I just ran out of time. I really enjoy that level of mystery and problem solving in a game, and it's something very few actually do. Obviously, I can't speak on how well it's executed at this point, but I can see the writing on the wall. On the other side of the Hell is Us equation is the game's combat, which I already said was melee focused. Don't expect an arsenal of guns or any sort of ranged weaponry because they're not effective against the strange horrors that you'll be challenged to defeat. The game's combat is broken into two halves. On one side, you have the melee weapons that you wield and control. We got to see a bunch of different options during the last hour of our play session, including swords, polearms, and axes. Very high fantasy stuff, but with a tech twist. Depending on the weapon, its progression, and some other variables we didn't really get to explore, you can unleash a number of limbic abilities which are all tied to the equipped weapon. This is where the game really leans into the tech dystopian theme, because while you're using medieval fantasy-inspired weapons, the abilities you use are actually much more technologically grounded, and this gives the game a really interesting dual dynamic. You've got more traditional hack-and-slash melee weapons, but you can bust out these high-powered tech moves at will, and that's pretty cool. Remy also has access to a drone, and this is something I really wanted to dive into more, but simply didn't have the time or access to enough of the system. Your drone provides you with another set of abilities. The first one we had access to was a channeled stun, which ended up being a godsend because Hell is Us at times features some really intense enemy density, especially early on. Using your drone, you can crowd control enemies, almost like you would in an MMORPG. This became an essential part of the action because trying to take on multiple enemies at once was almost impossible. The combat isn't Souls-like, it's much more action-forward, but there is a brutal stamina system that you have to manage. If you go in swinging like a barbarian, you're going to die, and quickly. On top of that, your max stamina actually follows your current health, so if you end up getting low, you have less stamina to use for your actions. It was, at times, a punishing system. One of the ways the team compensates for this is with the introduction of a healing pulse system, which isn't entirely new, but I do think it's pretty unique to this game. As you attack enemies, you'll build up a store of particles. Once you're done attacking, those particles will pulse around you, and if you hit R1 when the particles pulse, you'll restore a portion of your health, depending on how much damage you did. You can really game this system later on once you have abilities and more powerful weapons, but even early on it's impactful because again, stamina parallels your current health. Once we got into the dungeon, we had access to much more of the drone's capabilities, such as a whirlwind mechanic, which was a heavy favorite of mine, allowing me to deal a ton of damage in an AoE quickly. There were some other support abilities like an enhanced dash that lasted a few seconds, and an offensive ability that shot Remy forward in a straight line, dealing damage to enemies in the path. Between the weapons and the drones, there's going to be a lot of loadout tweaking, especially because you have 4 slots with both your weapon and drone to mess around with. Combat overall feels challenging, but good enough. We actually gave a ton of feedback to the developers about this system in particular, because we all felt like it was close to being great, but wasn't quite there. One thing that I personally expressed to the devs was the lack of information being provided to the player during any sort of engagement. The combat animations weren't dramatic enough that you could internalize enemy attack patterns, and there was no ancillary elements like audio or graphic cues to really help you in that classic combat dance. Because you can both dodge or parry enemy attacks, not unlike a Souls game, you need that information to be effective, and it just wasn't there, which made each fight artificially difficult. To add to that, some of the early parts of the game feature some outrageous enemy density. With just a sword in hand and one ability with your drone, you'll come up against some really challenging enemies or even packs of enemies, and that can make your situation near untenable. Luckily, I was able to limp my way through a bunch of the more difficult confrontations, but as things stand, it's a steep difficulty curve that I'm afraid some people won't be able to overcome. Now, one way to offset this was through the use of consumable items, which I'll admit I often find incredibly pointless in action-adventure games. Give me a good sword, some abilities, and a progression system, and I will figure out the rest. But in this case, the challenge dictated that I actually use those items a lot. In that sense, the lack of combat information almost forced me to lean on these items, but I do think that's really a happy accident. Even if they tweak the combat in a favorable way, I think items will still play an important part in the overall action. There's nothing wildly different about the items compared to other games, but essentials that restore health and your limbic power were something that did fit naturally into this game. I do suspect there's a lot more as far as consumables go, but that's something we'll have to explore once we have access to more of the game. As far as progression goes and any power level systems, well, I really can't comment on that right now because we didn't have access to enough of the game to really get a clear breakdown of those systems. So, after 3 hours, I walked away from my play session still very intrigued by this game. The way that we as players will explore and interact with this world is the single biggest driver of my interest, but honestly, I am also a fan of the combat and those systems, and with the right adjustments ahead of this September release date, I think this game has a real chance to make serious waves with the action-adventure and possibly even the Souls crowd. Guys, I'd love to know your thoughts about Hell Is Us. Leave us a comment in the section down below. And as always, if you appreciate the work that goes into making these videos, do me a solid, hit that thumbs up, and consider subscribing. My name is Kodiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.